See, I mean, as I said before we started recording, the reason I'm kind of quite, why I'm really looking forward to talking to you today about your stuff is because I've talked about fraud and misconduct and those kind of things a few times now on the podcast. And actually, by pure chance, your episode will be coming out just after a double episode I did with Eugenie Reich, who wrote the book Plastic Fantastic about Jan-Henrik Schön, the fraud in physics, and who now works as a lawyer in kind of whistleblowing contexts. So by pure coincidence, your episode is coming out directly after that one. So we'll have 3 episodes in a row on this topic. So I've done a few of those episodes, but what's really cool about your stuff is that it's a completely different kind of misconduct. So most of the stuff I've done so far has focused on manipulating data, making up data, duplicating figures and that kind of stuff. This is, it's a nice thing about fraud. There's always more. There's always a new kind of fraud on the horizon. So yeah, I really look forward to talking about that. And I mean, shall we just maybe start by, classically kind of how you got into this? I mean, so you were doing a PhD, I believe, in Cambridge in some sort of fluid mechanic engineering kind of thing?
Yes. So by background, my PhD in fluid dynamics, sort of applied maths in an engineering department, or the engineering department in Cambridge. And about 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago now, I was trying to write my thesis and was therefore on Twitter and saw a tweet by Elizabeth Bick, who I'd followed for some time on Twitter. So I'd been interested in, I guess, not actively, but been aware of and interested in scientific fraud for a while. This is something that's interesting. I find, I guess, crime or financial manipulation, all these sorts of things, whether it's reading an article about Enron or just some sort of someone trying to get away with something and some scheme and something, and then how it all unravels, right, is interesting.
Yeah. True crime is very fascinating.
Right, everyone, true crime podcasts and all these things are very popular. So I saw, Elizabeth tweeting out these various, spot the duplication, spot which images flip, right? And I'm awful, right? Never do it unless it was like a potato print, right? Like that someone had used to, or an exact duplicate. And even then, if it was in a grid of images, I'd still take forever. Right? So I was aware of it. I thought what she did was really interesting, important, but could not partake in it in any way myself. And it was sort of also in, biomedical sciences normally the things she was looking at. And again, I have no awareness of that, or, that's not my field at all. So
and it also seems to me that the kind of image manipulation she does is also fairly specific to biology. It feels to me, at least the kind of stuff I do, I never see images where you could duplicate something. It's always some sort of summary statistic or something like that.
You need to have a field with a lot of images, right? And lots of things of, you do your Western blot as proof that a thing has worked. You have your histology slides or your images of cells or something to prove that you did grow these things. Or, again, I'm already running out of words. I don't know biomedical stuff. So, she was doing that. And I thought it was really cool, but couldn't partake. I just watched her do it. And then, I think June 21, she shared a preprint by Guillaume Cabanac, Labbé Magazinov, and Cyril Labbé about tortured phrases. So I don't know if this has already come up on this podcast at all.
No, not at all. I've not talked about this kind of stuff at all. We've only had the other side of fraud. Yeah.
Okay. So, for the uninitiated, so all 3 of them are computer scientists, and they, while reading computer science papers, had noticed the repeated appearance of some unusual language in the papers. So in English or any language, but in English, there are multiple legitimate ways to say the same sort of thing, and you don't want to repeat yourself. You change wordings. But there are, particularly in science or technical language, there are some technical phrases which sort of have to be like that, right? So an example is artificial intelligence. Right? The phrase is artificial intelligence. If you change it to man-made intelligence or man-made consciousness, although maybe, on a thesaurus it says, well, those have a very similar meaning, that's not the phrase, right? And so they were seeing text like that, right, where the text maybe made sense in English, but the technical language was lost, right? It was not using the correct technical terms. And what they surmised was happening was that people were trying to hide the fact that they had plagiarized. So if they just copied a chunk of text from another source and just copied it straight in, now with Turnitin and Authenticate and all publishers are using those sorts of things, it would just be immediately flag up, you've plagiarized this chunk of text, it's over there, paper rejected. So to avoid that, they used these freely available bits of software which do paraphrasing. And certainly in the early days of these bits of software, they were really crude. So they would take the source text and they could only recognize pretty much strings of just individual words. They would go through word by word and they would go to a thesaurus, look up that word, pick the first synonym in the list and replace it. And they just go through word by word through a paragraph of text like that. Now, obviously, if you do that, you produce a text that makes no sense whatsoever, probably. Right? Most likely it will make no sense. But it will not trigger Authenticate or Turnitin or your plagiarism checking software at all. So if a journal, a conference, whoever, is relying on Turnitin or Authenticate so heavily that no one actually reads the text, right? Because if you know English, it immediately makes no sense. But if you are only using Turnitin or for plagiarism checking, then you just get a big tick and your text gets through. And again, if your peer reviewers aren't paying attention, and this is assuming that everyone involved is well-meaning, right? But if your peer reviewers are real and trying to do an okay job, but they just rushed or that their English isn't great or whatever it is, then this stuff gets published. And so they had found hundreds of these papers with phrases such as man-made consciousness for artificial intelligence.
Heat transfer, I think, was another one.
That was me.
That was actually
right.
Okay. Sorry.
So they had found these phrases from computer science and they wrote this preprint. And so I saw this and thought that was really interesting and cool. And I also quite like wordplay and puzzles and things. And so I wondered if the same sort of thing could be happening in my field of fluid dynamics. So I picked a couple of technical phrases that would only have one right way really of saying them, plugged them into a little paraphrasing widget online, and Googled that phrase, and up popped hundreds of papers. So I think the first one I tried was heat transfer, which is a concept for which that is the phrase. And the phrase that was spat out was warmth move, which doesn't make any sense. Right?
Yeah, even one of the
classic things with the paraphrasing software is there are many words in English which can act as both like a noun or an adjective or a verb, and it has no idea. Like the software has no idea which meaning is, because it's not seeing it in context at all. It's just seeing this one-off word. So if it picks just the wrong meaning, or it picks it as a verb instead of a noun or whatever, then you get something really nonsensical.
And both heat and transfer can be nouns and verbs, yeah.
Exactly, right. So you get,
I think English is a particularly interesting case. I think, I grew up mainly in Germany, and I think in German this wouldn't work quite as well, because there's just, I think, in English there's so many, because it has all these different influences, also there's so many synonyms for many words that actually often mean the same thing, just because you might have one from Latin, one from Germanic, and that kind of stuff, or Middle English or whatever, but... Yeah.
And I guess the fact there's also not really any, there's almost no verb endings. There's no adjectival agreement. So
exactly,
sort of everything is standalone. So and I guess if after I typed in warmth move into Google, if nothing had come up, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. But instead, there were several hundred papers that appeared, and I tried a couple more and found loads more, and that's basically the beginning of my journey in
the villain origin story.
Yeah, that's my villain origin story, exactly. So I think I even replied to Elizabeth on Twitter saying I found some more, not really know, and she said, put them on PubPeer, a website I'd never heard of.
Yeah. And
so I started putting these things on PubPeer, papers with these, and particularly there's a real snowball effect with these tortured phrases, because again, if someone's taken a whole paragraph, there's probably not just one, and paraphrased all of it. You find that paper with, the tortured phrase you already know, But then in that paragraph, you see other phrases, and now you're like, if you can work out what that should be, you've now got a second tortured phrase to add to your list of things.
So just briefly in the beginning, can we imagine it literally as you just going like, what's the term, I could think of, and then you just try out a few, Google it, and then basically one by one responding on Papier, or?
Yeah, yes.
Maybe
basically.
Not to all of them, I don't know. It sounds like maybe you don't, I don't know.
I mean, I think to begin with, I can get quite obsessive about things, so definitely be spending several hours of an evening.
And you were supposed to write your thesis.
And instead of writing, exactly. And I had all the motivation in the world to do this, because then I didn't have to write my thesis.
Did you also check for, it sounds like there were hundreds of articles, but presumably you would also have to check that it was actually a tortured phrase and not just, I did a systematic search for something recently, and, again, 2 nouns, and sometimes in the actual use, they would be, one noun, comma, and then another thing, and it would be like a list of different things. So there's many cases where the search engines just don't see punctuation and that kind of stuff.
Yes, and like full stop, the end of one sentence, the beginning of the next sentence. That can happen. So always, it wasn't, my only confirmation wasn't just Google says this contains this.
So you really did put in a lot of...
Going to the paper, and the real fun, a fun challenge is trying to find the source text. Right? So that can be an exciting or interesting little puzzle.
I saw...
You've only got the tortured nonsense thing, and trying to work out what it's done to get the search the right string into Google such that it throws up. And once you've got it, you've got your Rosetta Stone sort of thing. That's a real way to find then a load more tortured phrases, because you can see what it's doing. You can cross-reference. Yeah.
I saw, so there was I think this might actually be how I first heard about you, that you won the Dorothy Bishop Award this year. And they said in the little reason for why you got it, or why you were one of 3 people to get it, it said, overall it is frankly astounding how one early career researcher with no funding for this work has single-handedly achieved the downfall of numerous paper mill users and owners by clever detective work on the internet. And I think that's already a good example of clever detective work on the internet. It's basically piecing together evidence and
absolutely.
I've never done this, and I should probably do this for my own stuff now, some of those tortured phrases, but I can definitely see the appeal of this kind of, puzzling it together and seeing.
So one thing that's almost like the era of tortured phrases should be over, and it's massively declined. Because I said, the software, when it began, text analysis and understanding how sentences worked and not viewing just them, the text only as words, separated by spaces, right? But seeing it all together. So the first bits of paraphrasing software were word by word, and the output was utter nonsense. And if any competent or semi-competent reader of English read it, they would know it was junk. So you're relying on no one reading it or caring. But even sort of generation of new text, right, pre-AI, pre-ChatGPT, but still, the new versions of paraphrasing software came out, which they could change the order of sentences. They could swap clauses within sentences. And so if your aim is to get below a certain percentage similarity on Turnitin, you need to do a lot less manipulation of individual words if you're starting to swap around chunks of sentence and the order of sentences and things. You only need to change many fewer words. And so the chance you get the tortured phrase is much less likely. So that's one thing there, even before the ChatGPT sort of AI, the text analysis and paraphrasing software had improved already so that you didn't need to change every single word. And that combined with the fact that, let's jump back slightly. Once I got involved with these tortured phrases and posting them on Pubpeer, it wasn't too long before Guillaume Cabanac, one of the authors of the preprint, got in touch with me and said, I'm seeing what you're doing this. And I actually have here's this website I've built where we've created sort of a dictionary of fingerprints of tortured phrases. And, every night we search search literature, and anything that's flagged, we sort of collate them and with which journal is in, when was it published, which phrases appear, and allow you so that instead of having to go to Google every time, and we can work through the list, sort of try and get all of them, sort of thing, even though they were being published far faster than anyone was checking them. But still, so that's how I sort of got involved with that. But of course, also publishers can use exactly the same list to screen incoming submissions before they even bother sending them out to peer review. So there are publishers who use what Guillaume created to screen their submissions. And I see no reason why every publisher shouldn't do that.
That's probably a phrase we'll hear more than once today.
Perhaps, yes. But if that immediately gets rid of the appearance of any of those tortured phrases in the literature. It's not to say that people are still trying to avoid plagiarism by getting around it rather than writing original text themselves, but they've had to move on to more sophisticated methods.
Presumably also the fraudsters could do similar things. Look at what phrases to avoid or something like that, if they know about this.
Yes, and one of the things, anything that's publicly available to help detect fraud is used to try and get away with fraud. So fraudsters will use Turnitin to check. They know that, if there's more than 10%, 15% similarity that Turnitin returns, that's when the journal will say, this similarities, they either reject or come back and say, you need to edit some text, or what have you done here? So before the submission, they will pass it through Turnitin themselves, and it comes back as 9%. Great, we've done enough. We've done enough paraphrasing.
Yeah, and I guess this is also just from the way I understand it is this is just an inherent problem in any kind of crime detection, in the sense that even if you take something as obvious as what the police does and that kind of stuff, they can't rely on stuff that they can't reveal how they got the information. I'm presuming, at least in most cases, because you can't just go like, well, he definitely did it, can't tell you why. And I'm presuming, and I'm assuming in front of a court that's not going to hold. You have to say how and why you measured it and why it's a good method and has to be approved and whatever, something like that. And presumably here's the same thing. If you want to have some sort of democratic system, then you have to share how you say, like how you found out that someone committed some sort of fraud. And then it has to be open so then people can use it to get around it. There is this arms race, exactly. So, and this was also something, it's not like I had a brilliant insight here, but it seemed to me that kind of type of fraud detection, there was a very short period of time when this was really applicable, and now there are infinitely better ways to make up stuff without actually doing anything.
Yes, again, it's sort of surprising that people still bother, basically. And yet, there are still new papers full of tortured phrases being added to Guillaume's problematic paper screener every day.
It's wild. I mean, ChatGPT is free. You can use the free version. You don't have to pay. Yeah. Anyway, luckily, as there's all sorts of other stuff you did. So also, It's not like this is the end of your story. But I thought we have to maybe take a slight step back, because I think a fairly obvious question here is, why do people bother with this? Because, you mentioned as soon as anyone actually reads this, it's clear that it's nonsense. What's the incentive here? As I said, I talked to Eugenie Reich, and in her, we talked about Jan-Hendrik Schön, and in his case, it was obvious what the incentive was. He was at Bell Labs. He was, people thought he might win the Nobel Prize, right? There were lots and lots of very obvious incentives for why he would commit this kind of fraud. But what's the point in... So presumably the journals that do this are not the top journals, or even the decent journals, I would assume, most of the time. So why? Why publish complete gibberish? What's the point here?
So people really like to assume that. It'd be nice and comforting to be like, there's the nice journals which I read and publish in. And then there's these other bad, I know there's some bad journals. And of course anyone can I can set up a journal tomorrow, right? I need a website. That's it, right? That's all. It can be like, this is now the International Journal of ABCD, and pay me $100 and I'll host your PDF on my website, right? Okay, I'll do it. That. So, and of course you can't stop. Of course, someone can do that. You can't ban that happening, right? So there's always this scale of journals. But yeah, it's not just some journal you've never heard of or some publisher you've never heard of. These things with tortured phrases got published in basically every journal you'd care to name, and suddenly, your Elsevier, Springer Natures, Wiley, Taylor & Frank, right? All the big publishers, Q1, high impact factor journals. Okay. And again, it's not just that, like, very rarely was someone stealing an entire paper. They weren't taking the entire paper, paraphrasing the entire paper and sending that in. That was unusual. What was far more common is they were copying a bit of text which they couldn't be bothered to write, right? So like the literature review. So there's a load of literature reviews which consist of the abstracts of half a dozen relevant papers, and they have paraphrased the abstracts. I've sort of gone, Smith, 2010, did, and then it's sort of the abstract paraphrased, and that that's their literature review. Right? I mean, that's boring to write, or they thought it was. They're like, or for example, methodology. There's some technique where they can't be bothered to introduce this technique, or even just so, if you want to hear, here's a recent review on this technique, go and read it. Instead, they feel they have to have some text saying this text, how this method works, whatever they've done. And there's only so many ways of saying it, but what they've done is taken someone else's explanation of how it works and then paraphrased it again to avoid being accused of plagiarism.
Right. Okay. So we're not actually talking necessarily about completely made up stuff. Even it could.
No, there's lots
trying to save some time.
Yeah, it's people
actual stuff they did.
Yes, it's people like, well, I know my paper needs a literature review. It has to have one. I don't want to write that. And then, followed by some potentially really good. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Sort of, results, discussion, sort of things. But again, if you're prepared to do this, you may well be prepared to cut other corners as well. So your research probably isn't amazing.
But I mean, it seems to me that is probably what most people are going to do these days with LLMs, right?
Yeah, and I think now it's what people are using ChatGPT
for the introduction. I mean, I don't think I would ever do it, just because the writing for me is the best part, even if it can be really frustrating at times. So I think this is by chance something I'm not inclined to do, but I could totally see that that's what the vast majority of people.
And obviously, there are lots of people who are motivated for different reasons, sort of, or to use some, to speed up their writing process. Or it could be they found it really difficult. It could be they're pushed for time, and that could be a PhD student trying to get a conference abstract out.
Sometimes the reviewer wants you to cover this topic that you don't think is relevant, so you're like, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. There's all sorts of, or it could be a paper mill who are just trying to produce as many papers per day because that's how they make more money. Right? So there's lots of different...
The whole spectrum. Yeah,
of reasons why someone might want to use this sort of tool. Yeah. And then, but still, you've produced a paper which has clear junk and nonsense in it. So there are some which, either the peer reviewers don't notice, don't care, editor doesn't notice, doesn't care, because the rest of the work is okay. But there are even ones where it is full-on junk. Again, you've got to get it through the journal, but obviously for the author, it's I have a publication, right? Tick, number goes up. So you have a publication, and then all of this, we're sort of getting towards now sort of publication manipulation. Why do people want more publications? Well, for career, for promotion, for all these things. So, every publication has a references section. You can then give citations to your friends, or to other people at your institution, or to people who paid, or to yourself. Though that, again,
that's a common one.
That's something that is flagged up and fairly obvious. So that, again, people tend not to do because it's so obvious. But even just with 2 or 3 people, you can just cite each other in a little triangle, and it's much less obvious what's happening. Or you can cite people who you've been paid to cite, and we're getting down to this ecosystem. So let's say you've produced some junk paper, right? Whether it's ChatGPT, you want it to be published, or I think really the deciding point is you want a publication, right? You need a publication. You do not have either the time, the money, the effort, whatever, to actually produce a good bit of science and write a paper. But you want your name on the paper. So there's several different ways you can go about this. you can go to a paper mill and sort of pay to pretty much have a paper produced, and then a paper mill needs that paper to be published. Lots of them say you only pay on publication, no money up front. Some of them might be 50-50, but plenty of them say payment only after publication. And so they want that paper to be published. So, okay, we've got to get this through peer review, we've got to get it past an editor. So some of them play the numbers game. Right? You submit the same paper to a dozen journals. It doesn't flag any plagiarism things because it hasn't entered the system for any of them. It hasn't, Turnitin isn't going to flag that you submitted it to 12 journals. And then you see which journal is, editor isn't paying attention. You see which peer reviewers give you the easiest ride, and which whoever said, if anyone says accept, you withdraw your submission from all of the other journals, and now you have your paper published. In doing so, you have massively wasted everyone's time. Loads of peer reviews have had to be done multiple times for the same paper when only one set needed to be done. That still, there's a risk that your paper is just too bad for anyone to publish it. I mean, again, you can always move down the journal list, and there will always be a journal that will publish your paper at some point. Right? It's just how far down this list you have to go. Another way to make sure the peer reviews are good is to organize that you know who the peer reviewers are. So there are still journals which ask authors for suggestions for peer reviewers.
I think all of them actually do, right?
Some people have stopped it because it's so open to manipulation.
Oh, really? I think all the ones I've submitted to have had that.
Oh, okay, right. Well, so if you put someone...
it doesn't mean they'll act on it. But,
it doesn't, but finding peer reviewers is hard. And again, if you submit it to some journals and one of them acts on it, well, now you can just have the peer review say whatever you want. Right? So that could be, your friends. People might notice if it's at your institution. But if you're working through a paper mill, you can have a network of people, so you ensure that they're not known to the author, they're not a previous collaborator with the author, and they could be real people, or then they could be the named person is the person who does this peer review, and they're just being essentially bribed by the paper mill. Or the paper mill could give the details, or sort of give the name of a real person with an academic profile, but a fake email address for that person. And then, again, now someone who's just employed by the paper mill can pretend to be academic, however, and give a very positive peer review. And in all of that, you're still trying to dupe the editor. But the most certain way to get your paper published is to simply bribe the editor. Then you don't even have to really... the editor can just be like, yeah, peer review happened. Or they can accept anything. Right. If the editor's on your team, then you can publish anything. So...
Yeah, maybe too. So I think, it's kind of wild, like how much of a scope this industry has of just getting nonsense or made up stuff published. And I think we'll probably try and go into lots of the individual points you made. Just had two brief comments. One is that, actually about the journals, I had a friend who worked at Scientific Reports, and as like a senior editor or whatever, I don't know exactly what the title was, but apparently, they regularly had meetings about like how to stop paper mills, because it's just, I think Scientific Reports is like the right sweet spot where it's a good journal, but it's not that great. So like they get like lots of submissions of, just made up stuff. And I don't actually know how they ended up dealing with it, but just wants to add that it's definitely a big problem at major journals we all read articles from.
Yes. Yeah, and I say, in the case of Scientific Reports, perhaps they haven't fully dealt with it yet. Diplomatically say that.
Okay.
But they're by no means the only one.
And from what I understand, it really is just a matter of, I published then, I didn't have a great experience with Scientific Reports, and I probably won't publish there again, even though it got published, but I do understand just the scale of the problem they have is enormous, and I don't envy them for it. So I understand why, it's difficult. The other funny thing I just realized is that I just remembered that, talking about tortured phrases, I realized actually Google gave me a tortured translation phrase of one of your tweets. So I, looked at your name just to find your website or, whatever. And it translated one of your tweets about paper mills literally into German as basically paper. So the word paper, has two meanings in English, right? As like a publication and as the literal material.
Right. Yeah.
So in German, it doesn't have that. It's just the material. So it literally translated paper mill into like paper and then factory or whatever.
Nice.
So I guess actually that's quite common with translations, I guess, to get these kind of...
Absolutely. Finding the context is tricky.
Yeah. Because at first I realized, like, what is he talking about? Why is he talking about, like, you know, people who produce paper? But then it quickly became obvious that, yeah, it was about an actual paper mill. Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, like, there's a bunch of other stuff you've done. Maybe, do you want to, shall we maybe talk about, I mean, this is not unique to Hindawi, but something they like to do with their special issues.
A couple of sort of different ways, even within that, a couple of ways of working. So in 2022 or something, again, lots of people, if you're willing to commit one kind of academic fraud, you're often willing to commit another kind of academic fraud.
Yeah, whilst you're at it.
Exactly. Or just, they're all convenient to helping you do what you're trying to do, sort of thing. Why restrict yourself to one? So I'd noticed that lots of these papers with the tortured phrases were showing up in random Hindawi journals. I mean, and also all the other publishers, but plenty of them were showing up in these Hindawi journals. And some of them had really weird titles, or were very bizarre topics which didn't seem to match the journal they were in, even slightly. Or they had one sort of little keyword, almost like looked like tagged onto the end of the title. So if you could write a paper on anything and then say, using big data of the end of your title, basically, and that would mean it could fit in some computer journal, even if what you're actually talking about was like English teaching or playing basketball or something like this. And loads of these papers were one in special issues, and particularly most of these ones were from China, this particular set of way of doing things. And slowly realizing that there's just these thousands and thousands of these papers, all often looking a certain way, all in these special issues. And there was one in particular that I looked at and wrote about on Dorothy Bishop's blog, if you're aware of her. And there's this special issue in the Hindawi Journal, and it had 60-odd papers in it. And 50-odd of them all had a corresponding email address from the same tiny or regional Chinese university, but none of the authors went to that university. And all of those email addresses were of the form, I think it was 1980, and then 4 more random digits, or 4 digits afterwards. But they weren't actually random because they were some of them were nearly consecutive. It was like nearly consecutive 8-digit numbers. 55 email addresses, all of this at small Chinese regional university, when none of the authors are from that university. And in sort of searching that email address, I found out that you could just buy the email addresses online. You can buy academic email addresses online. Because again, you just need one corrupt IT person, right? Someone with the ability. And again, there's going to be lots of people who want, paper mills, but other people, but there's a demand to have academic email addresses. So therefore, someone will be willing for the right price to provide you with loads of academic email addresses. So you could just, someone clearly bulk bought a block of these email addresses and then was using them for their paper milled papers to all these Chinese authors. And none of the papers made any sense. And that was just this one sort of so obvious sort of thing. And Hindawi had been paid $2,000 or $1,500 for each one of those papers. And there were, in particular, the email addresses thing was really not quite. There were these email addresses also appearing in a few other special issues, but that clearly was a fairly one-off thing, and most people weren't quite that stupid. But there were special issues, again, full of the same kind of nonsense. And the special issue had 300 papers in it. It doesn't feel very special, right? That feels like a drip tray, right? And just collecting anything, just push more things into it. And I think the problem is, the Hindawi guest editor sort of system, as they really wanted to expand. And one way to do that is just to get more editors involved, is to say, well, do you want to run a special issue? Suggest it to us. And in theory, we might say yes, we might say no. It looked like they always said yes. And you run the show. You're in charge of sorting out the peer review. You're in charge of accepting or rejecting papers. And of course, the money rolls in, the money rolls off to Hindawi. And clearly for about 2 years, everyone just looked at the balance sheet going up and rubbed their hands, right? And no one looked behind the door.
I mean, just to put this in perspective, I think I saw your talk you gave, I think in your department at Cambridge. Yes. I think it's online. And I think you said something like, this is one journal at Hindawi that has, this many papers at $2,000 each. And there's, dozens of journals or whatever in the publishers. So they're making basically millions per year off of stuff that's just made up and clearly, obviously.
Yeah, just completely obviously nonsense. But the authors, particularly in China, there are many universities where you need a published paper in order to graduate even with a master's.
Which is insane, yeah.
And you might need, 1, 2, 3 papers to publish to get your PhD. And so that drives an enormous, that's most people's master's projects or whatever aren't, they're not great, or they're not amazing, most or plenty of them aren't suitable for publication, and you don't need, So
I don't think it's the point of a master's thesis.
Well, exactly,
but faced to learn stuff and be exposed to stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so you're still training, so, and that's even if you're doing something which sort of is research. But there are plenty of things. It's clear from the titles, because again, the title had to be relevant enough that I guess the person could show it to a committee, right? Someone could read the title and just title, name of the person. Yes, you have your paper. Right? And so that's why there were so many on teaching English as a foreign language, or different teaching concepts, because to qualify as a teacher, you need, from your university, you needed your paper.
Yeah.
So, and also, I think lots of policemen as well, like police officers, again, to graduate from police college. And this is often these regional colleges, which are, training teachers, policemen, these sorts of things.
So just one question I have that's a general question that maybe is interesting in this context. Who's paying for this stuff? Because you have so many costs, right? Depends, obviously not everyone uses all of this, but for some of this, they pay for special services. For some of them, it's, as we'll probably get into later, when people buy authorships on papers, you have the publication costs. I guess some of them pay for some of the others, but especially because you mentioned, I think some of the Hindawi open access or processing costs were as I said, $1,000, $2,000 or something like that per article. It's where does that money come from? Is it just, in this case, for example, maybe the students themselves seeing it as part of their education cost, basically?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. They've been given an unreasonable demand, and they need to graduate by this date in order to go and start job X or to move on to the next thing.
So it's just a higher tuition fee, basically.
Yeah, it's just, they've already paid for tuition or the thing, and them or their family will pay to make this happen so they can graduate and move on with their lives. And that's, I think, part of the thing as well. The paper doesn't need to be any good at all, because its only use is as a line on someone's CV, or even basically for their graduation committee, or whatever. Once they've graduated, it doesn't even matter to them if it gets retracted. So if no one's, they've graduated as a teacher now, they're working as a teacher, it's done its use, right? It can be a one use
they're not
only.
going to get their degree retracted if their application gets. Yeah. I guess unless it's obviously fraud, then maybe it's a slightly different thing. But
yeah. So I think one of the real insights into how these things work was, again, I spend a lot of time digging around on the internet, digging around on social media. So there are Facebook groups dedicated to the buying and selling of scientific papers and of authorships and of all the different bits of corruption. And some of them are sort of fairly geographically focused, and some of them sort of are anywhere in the world. And you have people who work at paper mills posting and sometimes doing it under their own names, or certainly at least under sort of fairly identifiable profiles. And so you can go to, and lots of them, again, this is where I'm sort of nervous about giving away too many details, but lots of them haven't locked their profile. So it's just public, right? So you can just go and look at their Facebook profile, right? And so often you just see a picture of, even if it is a real picture of them, well, you're some guy in Pakistan, or you're some guy in China, right? They can't do anything with that. But some of them have very interesting posts. And again, if it's unlocked, you can just scroll back through for as long as you want. And so one of these people, who is said they were Chinese, sort of had a fake English name, or they're called Jack Ben, which doesn't sound like that. So that's two first names, never really have that as a surname.
Also, as I've been told, Ben means stupid in Chinese.
Oh, really?
I have been informed that by Chinese people, yes.
Very nice.
So, I mean, it's kind of an ironic name. I don't know whether that's intentional, but...
I didn't, yeah. Nice. And so they had lots of posts saying, I am a Chinese publishing agent, and I need help from, I'm looking for editors who will work with us. We can help each other. And they would also have posts saying, looking for peer reviewers. We will pay $10 per peer review. Again, it's clear, we're going to suggest you're going to write a favourable peer review. We pay you $10, the paper gets published. Pretty. And right at one of their earliest Facebook posts, they shared a link to a PDF on an online repository, which contained the proof of, for any editors or people considering helping them. So you don't want to get scammed. And if you're going to compromise your morals or commit misconduct, you do want to get paid for it. It'd be a real mug if you did all that and then, having done it, they didn't pay you.
Yeah, it's also not the thing you can go to the police to.
Yeah, exactly, right? Who are you going to complain to? Complain to your boss, complain to the police, And so they had the evidence to try and convince someone that they would really do this. And so what they had was images of lots of papers that they had successfully published. And best of all, they had screenshots of bank transfers of them paying someone around $1,000 per paper for getting the paper published. And they had attempted to redact bits, probably with a mouse or something, which is quite hard. And so they had often completely failed to redact the information. And again, particularly helpful, they had that in some cases they had used the reference number for the paper as the reference for the bank transaction. So I could just type in the reference number from the bank transaction and up popped this paper in a Hindawi special issue. And the name of the person on the bank transfer was the guest editor of the Hindawi special issue. Couldn't really be more complete
it's amazing.
than that. And this person was clearly being paid about $1,000 per paper. The special issue had, some of these person's special issues had over 100. I know they were editor of more than one special issue. They were editor of several. I'd say they easily had a few $100,000. If we assume that they were indeed paid about $1,000 for every paper there, then that's several $100,000 they were paid for essentially no work at all in 1 year.
Good salary.
Not too shabby.
So I just want to say that just for people considering doing this, just be aware that you can, in principle, fake a bank transfer. You could just make that up also, so it could still be a scam. I just love how this is dumb on so many levels.
Yeah, of course they could. You could indeed.
Here's a bank transfer. It can't be a scam now. There's a picture that looks like a bank transfer.
Indeed, and this editor or this academic, who was indeed an academic. They're an academic at a Middle Eastern university, and I suppose I should say that this is a story that made it to, I think, Science. And the guy's name is out in print, so I suppose I shouldn't be so coy about it. Or so this is already public. But anyway, yeah. Jordanian academic who had a little website for his business doing publishing services. The office is on Google Maps. You can find the address. It's got the phone number. I leave that to journalists. I do not ring up these people. Yeah, I have not got to the stage of having a burner phone for this sort of, I leave that for journalists.
You don't actually interact with the people. You just read and post on Papier.
I try and avoid interacting, directly.
I mean, is that actually, why is that? Is that just because that's like a different kind of thing? I mean, in a way, it would be fun to just call them and see what the process is like.
Yes, I suppose I'm trying to avoid confrontation generally. And I sort of, although, I mean, I do all of this in my own name, which various people have said is really stupid, but I do it in my own name. And you can just see it, and I have Twitter, and you can DM me on Twitter. People do. You can send me email. My email address as an academic is very easy to find. You can find my academic email address and send me an email. So in that sense, it's sort of, what's it worth if someone also has my phone number? But for that, that I have that's a step I haven't gone to. But this Jordanian academic, so he's a guest editor of multiple special issues, collectively hundreds of papers in them. He appears to be paying $1,000. And he's also loyal because he was also a Claravat highly cited researcher.
Very good. Congratulations.
I said that. I think, and the top 2% scientists and sort of thing. Because again, when you are a guest editor, one, you can put it's allowed to put a few of your own publications in there. There's guidance and things, but I think there's a reason why you're the guest editor in principle, right? Because you do research. You're the expert on this, right? So you could include a few things. Yeah. So he can put out some papers of his own, and also he can make it a condition that, you have to cite me a few times. Right? And again, if you've got 100 papers and they each cite you 3 times, not even excessive, sort of on any one individual paper case, that's still, each special issue you're gaining hundreds of citations. Yes, it was in his the national news for being one of Jordan's high cited researchers, top scientist, and things, until a couple of years ago when I think
probably still is a highly cited researcher.
Well, he would. Yes, he's in there. But Web of Science started putting some bleach in the water, sort of thing, and removing the people who were clearly gaming the system, or some of them anyway. And they removed him. And so I think that sort of led to, or was definitely, I think I was one of the people many people trying to shout about Hindawi's problems, all these special issues, and we're up to 11,000 to 12,000 retractions now for the special issue program.
So, a random question: Hindawi was bought by Wiley or something like that, right?
Yes.
Didn't they? Yeah.
So there's a
this year or something like that, right?
No, they bought it. I think in 2021.
Oh, okay.
Or 2022. They bought it basically as this was all really kicking off. And I imagine couldn't believe how much money they were raking in, what an excellent purchase this was.
I see. So they probably saw just the results and thought, this is a very profitable business.
They saw that publication numbers were going up by 30%, 50% a year. Yeah, and so there's a guy called James Heathers, who's he's doing a sort of a series on Hindawi and this acquisition process and due diligence or lack of and all these things. Sort of right now, I think there's been a couple of blog posts out, and there's more to come.
I'll link
to find out more about
with a bunch of other stuff we talked about. Yeah,
what's going on there.
I guess also just for context, he'll probably also talk about it at some point then on the podcast with Dan Quintana, the Everything Hurts. Would be surprised if they then also do an episode about that.
Yeah, probably on May or Audio.
Yeah, maybe again because I'm it's fun doing detective work and it's fun hearing about detective work. So I'm just curious, how do you, practically, how do you find out about these things? Because, I mean, you have the Facebook groups, you have Telegram channels, whatever it's called. Mm-hmm. How do you even get to the point of knowing that? It took me step by step. Yeah, how do you get to that point? Because this is all I'm not surprised these things exist, but how do you find them? Basically, how do you find evidence for them and that kind of stuff?
I mean, if anyone here just wants to go to Facebook and type in co-author or Scopus or something in Facebook search, they will find groups public groups.
So it's that poorly hidden. I thought it was like you went down a rabbit hole and then found a link to a group and,
No, it's all... And most of them aren't private because they're people who want to sell things, right? If you don't want to hide from your customers. And also, and one thing to be clear is that this isn't illegal, right? Nothing anyone doing here, almost certainly, or in the majority of cases, is not illegal.
Right.
So there's no, people have said, Facebook should be taking this down sometimes, for example, or sort of that, why? Or sort of, what would be the grounds for that, right?
You mean like it's basically just a publisher has a journal and there's an editor in that, and as a reviewer, you don't say that like when you do a review, you don't say that you didn't get paid for it, whatever, so it's just...
So there's things which are, we might be rather morally wrong, or they're definitely just, they're against the terms of service of the publisher, and they're grounds to discover to then retract the paper and things like this. But there's not... Criminality doesn't feature anywhere in that.
Right. So hiding it doesn't help you legally. It just maybe prolongs how long it takes people to find out. But then again, there's so much of this, it might not even make that much of a difference for your career. If, as I said, like in many cases, this is for a one-off publication you need or whatever, then... Well,
and lots of them are... So there's things which are, they're just sort of signposts. It's like a message board. It's like, find out, we'll help you with your publication, right? Ambiguous. Everyone knows what it means, but we'll help you. Right. We offer... Lots of them have a scale, offer multiple services. So some will offer translation services. So that's fine, right? Will it improve the English? Potentially okay. Or
that's very useful. Like I've read many papers that as a reviewer, where I thought like this would really profit from.
Right. The thing is, sort of, again,
someone going over it, yeah.
Yeah. So but again, it's sort of at what point does improving English become just writing it? Yeah. Right. There's this. It's a slight. This spectrum of sort of definitely okay services to potentially okay, depending how much you're using it and how much of what you've done, and then things. We offer data analysis. We offer programming. Again, potentially fine, potentially okay, but also in there, it goes all the way to, and will help you get your paper published. And again, some people do need advice on what is a suitable journal for the thing and how the publishing system works and stuff. So there's, again, potentially legitimate things that could be under that, but there's all, it just goes through into, we produce your paper and we bribe the editor or we get this thing published.
Yeah. There's also on the legitimate side, like I've definitely seen, as part of my PhD, we had a writing, like little workshop, like academic writing kind of thing. And, some people just do this on a one-on-one basis. This was like a group thing, right? Where they tell you.
Of course.
So there's also, as you said, like it's a bit of a sliding window from you help someone improve their sentences and you really work with them and then they're a better writer afterwards. And it helps everyone to, they just write the article for you.
Yes, exactly.
Making up stuff.
So those signposts, this is our WhatsApp number, this is our website, things, and it used to be more common for there to be adverts for authorship, which hid no details. So we say, co-authors wanted, here's the title of the paper, we're going to aim for this journal. First authorship position, $1,000, second $900, third author, corresponding $100 extra. Call this WhatsApp number. There are still loads of those adverts out on Facebook.
Sometimes you said, with the title and everything, right?
Exactly. So, and I honestly can't remember what prompted me. I suspect it was somewhere I saw someone found one, or they found an example of an advert, and I decided to look myself. And then, in particular, there was one profile, again, I think one real person, one Tunisian guy who was just starting in about the end of 2020 and going with it. So by the time I started looking at this, which I think was about autumn 2022, he had loads of adverts out, and also that's also more than enough time for papers to be published. So I could just type the title, copy the title into Google and find the paper immediately. And you would have some paper with 12 different authors, or 12 authors from 12 different nations, frequently 12 different disciplines.
I like the example you had of the econ department with X-ray diffraction, right, and what was the other thing? Just like two completely different techniques that no econ department has ever owned.
Yes, there's all the... So I think this... starts to reveal, or as an example of how much publishing is based on trust, how much the entire publishing system is based on trust. And the system, when someone realizes that if you just lie, there's nothing to check, the whole thing starts to fall apart. So, how these people would work mostly is they would, with a few authors on the paper, they would submit it to a journal. And then once it got accepted, it went out for peer review, they got the revisions back, accepted subject to revisions. And at that stage, they would then put out the advert saying, we have these positions available. They would sell them, and then when they send the revisions back, they would add a load of authors and say, in doing the revisions, these people help, this person did this, person did whatever.
Which can happen, unusual, but
can happen. But in fact, actually, they don't think in editorial systems can be that you can just add authors, and if no one notices, it happens. So lots of the retractions for these things say, this paper was submitted with these 5 authors. In the course of the revision stage, the first 4 authors, including the corresponding author, were removed and replaced with these 10 authors. The authors did not obtain permission from the editor like they're supposed to. They did not ask for exceptional permission for this. And which really shows that the system, such as it is, that if you want to do this, you're supposed to ask permission from the editor. But if you don't, you can just do it anyway. So there's this trust system built in that,
Yeah, I wonder. I'm trying to remember back to I don't have that much experience with publishing stuff, but yeah, I guess you just get accepted and then you get passed on to the, what's it called? The
proof editing or the
that kind of stuff, right?
team.
It's a completely different team. So I guess, I don't think anyone would notice.
Yeah.
Not sure.
But so, back in a few years ago, 2021, 2022, these adverts were coming out. This guy was posting all the adverts and he would have all the information. And then I started going through and finding all the adverts that matched the published papers and putting them on PubPeer, tweeting about them. They got a bit of traction. Retraction Watch rang him up and said, are you doing this? And he said, oh no. And then he stopped posting for a few weeks and then started again. But now the posts say, and he's still doing this every few days, he's still going, right? And he hasn't stopped in any way. Now it says, we have papers in cancer, mechanical engineering, earth sciences. Here's my WhatsApp, call me. And so I think, again, this is sort of the arms race, or the once you reveal, how they're working sort of thing. They can make a simple change and I can't do anything. Right? And I'm sure this person is still successfully selling authorships to papers every week. And he's not yet, and there are lots and lots of people like him. And just once he realized that someone was looking, because to begin with, again, clearly so blasé, clearly no concern at all that anyone who saw his post would care. Right? The only people who'd be interested would be either people who wanted to buy the paper, or people who didn't want to buy that paper, but they were still happy with the concept of authorship being sold. But yeah, he's still publicly posting these things. It's just now you just have to go to his WhatsApp.
Have you ever done that, or are you just in the kind of public-facing things?
Yeah. So I avoid. Yeah, again, to join a WhatsApp group, you have to reveal at least your number. I have a UK phone number. That's going to be fairly, I suspect, unusual in lots of these groups, and I think mine.
But I don't know. It doesn't really make it. Yeah, I guess maybe. Yeah.
I think seeing the country code sort of thing stick out. Or at least raise questions, whereas if you have one from the same country where the paper is being run from,
I'm sure you can get that.
Oh, of course, right. I can. It's a thing that can be spoofed, or just you get a card with that. Of course, it's possible. Yeah. But I just haven't got to that stage.
It seems like my task right now, without planning to, is just to try to get you into this. I don't know exactly why, but maybe it's just because I know it sounds will be interesting, but I'm not going to do it myself. So I want someone else to do it.
And the same with, and so that's where Telegram, you can be you have to provide a phone number, but you don't have to share that phone number with anyone else. So again, then you can.
I see.
So that's why I use Telegram quite a bit, and it's also where, for example, different countries favor different media, different social media. Some are banned. Some social media. So Facebook, I believe, is banned in Iran. Or certainly they don't. Certainly, it's not where this stuff happens, as far as I know, where there are lots of Iranian Telegram channels.
Right. I saw something random recently. I thought Google was banned in China. I don't know whether that's true, but I thought that was, or Gmail. What I heard.
Oh, quite possibly.
But I saw like an actual paper with a Chinese author whose corresponding email was a Gmail address. I was like, okay. I mean, I'm not quite sure how that works, but
I think there's a thriving trade in VPNs and things.
Yeah, it's probably that.
In China,
but I thought it was interesting to put that on your published paper.
Yes.
We've now introduced a bunch of different types of publication fraud that you've looked at and investigated. And the big question is, what can we do about this? I mean, this is often I feel like there's a necessary distinction here between what can you do as an individual who, isn't going to be majorly involved in this and just wants to, like, I guess, pay attention to things and maybe notice things that they wouldn't have noticed otherwise. And then maybe also for people who maybe like you do this a bit more involved, or like what journals should do differently or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to just take it from whatever makes most sense now for you?
Yeah, so I think the big challenge, almost all of this is driven by people wanting more papers and needing those papers to be cited more. And there's some different reasons why people want more papers, but primarily it's because either explicitly or implicitly it's required of them. Right? So whether you're the Chinese trainee teacher who needs their paper just to graduate and be a teacher, you're the Chinese doctor who needs to publish how many papers a year just to be promoted to your next, whilst being a doctor all the time, which obviously is so time consuming and full on. Or you're a PhD student in some country who wants to get a visa to leave your country and go to get a postdoc in a better university, say in a Western university, an American university, or even within your own country. Say in India, there's a sort of a points-based system for promotion, and the more points you get, the more you will get promoted. So there's
that's I think, don't know how explicit it is in other countries, but that sounds very familiar here. I know, like at where I did my PhD, I think if you wanted to do a cumulative thesis, there were points for different journals, probably based on impact factor or something like that for the discipline. Some slightly more nuanced, but yeah, and if you needed a certain amount of points.
Right, exactly. Points make prizes, and that's all of the incentives for all of this to happen. And so I think this is only going to stop when there's not that pressure.
So it won't.
Right. I mean, to some extent, sort of, yes, or the metricification of things, whether it, H-index, citation counts, publication counts, just focusing on essentially quantity of certainly of publications just drives this, and it doesn't drive good research. And I'm not even sure it drives more research. It drives possibly the same amount of research cut into smaller pieces. It doesn't drive, people taking a risk by trying something interesting that might not work. You need as postdocs, if you didn't get a paper or several papers out of a postdoc position, that would be seen as a failure or unsuccessful. So you need a project which will produce something.
So you take like the safe options.
Yeah, exactly. You take the safe options.
Lots of small safe options, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's one way of doing science. But yeah, if everything is that, then...
Yes, exactly. So yeah, not everyone should be taking massive risks, right? But there should be, you want some people to be just trying things and seeing what happens, even, and then to fail as well. But not for that not to be the end of their career, right? Because someone else has just been doing little small steps which they knew were going to work before they started, and they just keep ticking out the papers and they keep citing their previous ones in those papers, and it just all builds up. And again, they're not doing anything necessarily wrong, but as you push it to its extreme, that enables other people to sort of push it to its extremes.
I mean, as you said, like I think most people will do some aspect of that in their own work. But yeah, obviously, I think it's like you can see how with those incentives, people are pushed to do more and more extreme versions of that. I don't know. I mean, it seems to me now there is a bit of a counter movement now in the fields that I'm familiar with. I mean, so economics seems to be a bit different anyway in terms of publications. I'm an outsider to this, but from what I can tell, they basically have like their 5 journals or 4, something like that are just, that's all. Like you have those 5 journals, and if you publish in those, then you're good, and everything else almost doesn't matter.
Okay.
This might be a bit of a caricature, but I think they have much more of a focus on like big papers that take years to produce. But it seems to me also that like in psychology and neuroscience, there is more of a focus on, one paper in Nature Neuroscience is worth a lot more than, 3 or 4 papers in a much, much smaller journal.
I think this really depends on, field, but also, nation, country, and how familiar people are. People have to know that journal is really good, and that's the one that matters, right? And if you're, a university or without a background in that, you don't have some mentor, someone to tell you that, this is the place, this is what you should be trying to do, and this is what you should be trying to do. I think one of the examples is in mathematics, where generally it's sort of, there's a mathematics research which doesn't really have this problem. For example, in maths, the author, no one worries about who's first author. It's alphabetical always. Right? There's none of that hierarchy thing there. And there are the top maths journals, the places who want to publish in. But there's also an MDPI journal called Mathematics with a really high impact factor. And in fact, they're higher than some of the major maths journals. That churns out so many papers that, I guess, some maths happens in them. And, right. But, these papers are citing other maths, and it's able to rise up the rankings when you just judge them by impact factor of the maths journals, if you just look at impact factor. So if you're someone naive, then you might choose to publish there because, this is the best journal. And someone assessing you might go, you've published in this journal. If you're being judged on publishing in the journal with the highest impact factor, if that must be the best one, then it becomes a self-fulfilling thing of, now that's where some people are going. And you have the people sort of in the know who go, ignore that. The impact factor is meaningless. We publish in these journals.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, also just to clarify for what I said earlier with the counter example, it's not as if that doesn't introduce its own set of problems associated with people just trying to do whatever they can to get into one of those journals. It's not as it's better, but it does just seem to me that at least in the fields that I'm familiar with, there is a bit of, there's a bit of a move away from more papers is better, but I mean, at the end of the day, more papers is still better, unless I think some grant agencies say, give us 5 papers or something.
So I think that's one way you can give us your 3-5 best papers. And
if you don't have that restriction, then, I mean, it also makes sense, right? If you're trying to hire someone and one person has 4 papers and one person has 8, and it seems like they have good paper. Yeah, sure. I'll give it to the person who does the same but more.
Right, exactly.
But
but it just does lead to all of this horse trading and all this, whether it's the person who labs where everyone isn't, and the lab is in every paper, for example, right? Yeah, no money changing hands or anything. Nothing as untoward as that, but just everyone. Or the head of department or the head of the lab is on everything, and they've got 150 papers a year or something. Or there are these people.
Yep.
And again, no money exactly is changing hands. It just says supervision. Is their role in the credit thing. So I think something that could be, in terms of what can we do about even trying to stop some of these. Okay, we can't stop. No one can change the incentives, so we just got to try and make it harder for the fraudsters. I think it could be helpful to try and think like a hacker. Also, so lots of people. So when I first started investigating authorship for sale and finding these papers which look very clear. Here's the advert, here's the title, here's the paper 6 months later in your journal. Emailing editor-in-chief. They would often be outraged, right? They'd be horrified and outraged that this could happen, that anyone would do this, that it would happen in their journal. How dare someone?
Yes, 500 times this year.
That's just not what you're supposed to do. So I think, likewise, it shouldn't be so surprising that people would want to bribe editors, that people would try and organise peer reviews such that it is favourable. The publishing system is this big, complicated system, and people will try and exploit it at every single point. And I think, thinking like a bad guy, sort of thinking of, well, how would I, if I wanted, if I was so minded, how could I try and subvert the system? How could I break it? How could I get in and get something published when it shouldn't be? Because it's, and I think that's the sort of mindset that can be helpful, at least, in trying to shut some of these loopholes and tackle some of these issues.
It seems to me, and I don't know whether this is true at all, but my intuition is that, I guess this is probably generally the case with a lot of bureaucracies, that you just make it so annoying to commit fraud that you might as well just do it properly. But by doing that, you also put lots of hurdles for everyone in the way that just becomes annoying.
Absolutely. It's also annoying for everyone else. Right. So, for example, the credit authorship sort of attribution sort of thing. Right.
Who did what.
Who did what, right? Yeah. The little thing at the end, which I think is, one, slightly helpful, even just to know, this person did the experiments and this person did the analysis, sort of thing. That could be helpful for just assessing whether someone is competent or whatever. But of course, you can just lie, right? You can just, it was, you brought it up earlier, one of these papers where, there were 12 authors from 12 different institutions, authorship sold papers. They'd filled in the credit thing and said this guy who was at an economics department in Tashkent, Uzbek University, I think, the economics department, had done X-ray diffraction. And it's
and something else.
Yeah, maybe. I can't remember, probably definitely, X-ray diffraction.
I have it actually here, and scanning electron microscopes.
Oh, okay, no, right. Yeah. Is that common in economics department? I don't think so. There's why... So, sometimes it can give the game, again, if people are just so dumb, but they could easily have just said he did instead, revision and editing, and then they wouldn't have had, But people can just lie, and so I think I mentioned this a while ago at some conference, and someone said, maybe rather than just this simple statement about, this person did the writing and this person did the experiments, there should be a paragraph sort of really explaining what each author did and really going into a bit more detail.
Because that's going to solve the problem, yeah.
Yeah, and so you just created a load of work for everyone, almost all of whom are not fraudsters, and the fraudsters can still just lie, and you've just made more work for everyone. Ultimately, you just sort of do have... There's always going to be some trust, right? Unless you're going around with a camera, you have to film yourself doing every single experiment and send that in as supplementary information, so that, then ultimately you do have to trust that people have done what they, said they've done.
But so I'm curious, what your position is on this. I remember I talked to Adam Mastroianni a few months ago. So he's done, so he did a regular PhD and published in great journals. But then since then, he's trying to, basically, he got kind of famous, at least as famous as he can be in our circles, for posting a preprint on arXiv called Things Could Be Better. And it's basically he at the same time published it on his Substack blog. And that's kind of what he wants to do for his publication. So not go to journals anymore, but publish things just on the internet for people to read, because it was very well written and very funny. Got a lot of feedback and attention through that. And his general argument is that I don't know where he got this from exactly, but that science is a strong link problem. So basically saying that it doesn't really matter too much how bad the bad stuff is. It just matters that the good stuff is great. In the sense that, let's say we take some of the papers that you've been talking about. Doesn't matter. Are they going to influence the scientific environment? Not really. they're just going to fall aside and be basically instantly forgotten. And so I'm just curious, with the discussion we've had so far, what kind of your position is on this. Should we, try and get to make it really hard for these people to get away with this if it comes at the cost of other people? Or should we, other people having to do more work? Or should we just say, well, people are always going to try and do some sort of annoying shit, so we're just going to let a certain amount of error just happen and,
So I think the problem is that the bad papers interact with the good ones. Right. So if those bad papers aren't so bad that they're completely excluded from any sort of ranking or anything like this, but for example, every one of those bad papers will have a references section giving citations to a load of other papers, which could be bad or they could be good. Right. So in that way, all these bad papers, someone could arrange to publish a load of bad papers which cite papers that they want to have, on people who they want to have more citations. Again, if these papers are not great but good enough that they're still in a journal that's in Web of Science or on Scopus or something like this, that person has more publications. They're now more likely to get a job over the person who is writing the good paper, potentially. Again, it depends how much people are being judged on just the numbers or the quality of the paper, right? But I think a big problem with how
people are going to be judged right now on the numbers. That's not change for a while. Yeah, even if we try and change it, it's going to be there for a while.
But I think, and so the preprint of him putting on his Substack thing, I think there is this problem, and I have a solution to it, but just that there's too much stuff, right? There's too many papers. No researcher pretty much can read all the papers coming out in their field. Even reading one paper a day properly is, with doing other stuff, it's probably difficult. Whereas,
unless you define your field incredibly narrowly, it's
right. And yet most things have got dozens of papers coming out every day. So you need a filter. Additionally, or one way is, I'll read the things from the goods journal. I will look. This journal is hard to publish in. It only accepts good things. So I will read the papers. I will prioritize at least reading the papers from this journal. This is my filter. If you say, well, I'll just put it on a preprint server, if everything's preprints, well, now you're going to read a load of stuff that's not great. Even if it's not fraudulent or bad, right? But you would like to read the best, the most interesting works in your field in the finite amount of time you have for reading papers and fine. So, now, I guarantee that someone will create some sort of ranking, some internal ranking on the preprint server for trying to be like, this is, and there are, I think, this reader recommends this one negative, whatever. You'll then get armies of bots clicking on these things. One thing, a good thing about the current system, or thing that could still, at least idealistically, I believe should be possible and good, is that if you are someone that no one has heard of, from a minor university or something, I believe that if you produce a really good bit of work, you can still get it published in a good journal. And then other people who would never have, they don't know your name, they've barely heard of you, haven't heard of your university, it's from a country without a reputation in this field, but somewhat, because they read the papers in that top journal, they become aware of your work. Whereas if that person had thrown that work in the preprint server, who's going to see it? Because people then have to have their own, people come up with other filters. I read the stuff from good university. I read the stuff that's coming out by Professor whoever, or Professor whoever's students. People are always going to need a filter because there's simply too much stuff to possibly read. And so if we remove the journal's filter, it's going to be replaced by other filters. People will have to come up with other filters. And some of them may be less desirable in terms of, I only read stuff from the US. I only read stuff from famous universities I've heard of.
Yeah, I agree in principle. I think Adam's case is really interesting because, by pure coincidence, I was actually one of the very first people. His thing got 30,000 downloads in a week or something, right? But as he said, not because of a blog post. He was kind of a little bit annoyed by that because he wanted to give attention to his blog, but he basically just put it up. And I don't know whether it still exists, but at the time there was a arXiv bot that just posted the most recent publication on arXiv.
Right.
And by pure coincidence, I was procrastinating on Twitter at the time, and so I saw it when it had like 20 views or something like that. But I think you're completely right in that so there's basically 3 reasons why I read the thing. The first reason was I thought the title was just like, things could be better. Like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, it sounded like it was so dumb, and I was kind of clicking on it just to make fun of it almost. It was that kind of procrastination I was doing. But then I saw, Adam Mastroianni, I was like, and then I recognized that name because I read a paper from him before, and it immediately says, does it say Harvard? No, it actually might not. I don't know whether it says Harvard University on the preprint itself, but I definitely recognize the name. And then third, it was incredibly well written, and I would recommend basically everyone read it. But I asked him a little bit, and I think maybe he's just being too modest, but I think he's just a very good writer who can also get away with that. But I think, and he writes on topics that also are like fun to read compared to like incredibly technical.
Again, once you're known, then you've people, if he puts out another paper, you're going to probably go and read it, right? You become, and as will other people. There was someone who this week or last week was in the Sciencey news for proposing that they're removing the journal titles off their CV. Right, so on their CV, they're going to include their papers, but it's going to include the titles. They're not going to include the journals, so they're not trading on the cachet of the journal. But I feel what they've done is create a minute more work for anyone reading their CV who is now going to have to just go and find whichever journal they're in. And again, I feel that's a thing that you can do as a really established person, right? You have the privilege now that people are going to read your work anyway because you're famous or you're established, the very you're tenured or whatever. And if you're someone trying to establish yourself, a way is to be like, I got my paper into the top journal in my field.
Yeah.
And people, and then people will read it, and maybe, they invite me to a conference, they invite me to talk about it, or whatever. I'm from small country, whatever, or without much funding, but I've managed to do this, and I bring it to the world stage by putting it in this journal.
That's when you really pay attention. When there's like a paper in a top journal and it's from a small place you've never heard of, you're like, well done. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You're really swimming upstream here.
And if you put it on your own personal website, you may as well just shout it out a window, right? I mean,
which I do sometimes.
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult because like I think the people who are the very established people who do this, I think they do it from a very good.
Oh, I totally understand
But yeah, I agree. I'm not sure this really solves the problem for people who aren't well known, even if that's what the purpose was. But so you kind of think like the journals should obviously, I mean, I agree that journals, like if they want to have relevance, then they should try and do this, because otherwise what are you doing? Be more vigilant to these kind of things.
Absolutely. I mean, they could without exception all do some things better, and some of them could do so many more things better. I think it's hard to argue that the major publishers shouldn't just have more people trying to fix things, right? And deal with historical things. Right? There's sort of 2 slightly separate challenges. There's, we could sort all of, we could have much better filters and to stop crap being published or the system being manipulated tomorrow, but we still have to then go back and deal with everything that has previously happened.
That's annoying.
And I think right now, some publishers definitely just, everyone's doing everything, or, you haven't got that separation.
I mean, I think there might also be other incentives, like you don't want to shit on the work of your previous editor or whatever in chief, which can make it a bit harder, but yeah.
But I think there's just not the commercial, it's not commercially useful.
I mean, where would Hindawi be without?
Well, okay, until you have some Hindawi level catastrophe, right?
Well, but I mean, even though, I mean, they're still probably more profitable than if they didn't do any of this, right?
No, I think Wiley have lost quite a lot of money. Okay, so because they paid billions or million, it's hundreds of millions. They paid a significant amount of money.
More than €100, yeah.
Yeah, they paid a very significant amount of money to buy Hindawi, and
okay, so that was such a big case. They actually got in trouble because of it, but.
Yeah, their share price is down and things like this. But without something of that scale, and of course that publicity, I mean, it's the publicity of it that really made, people, they're going to have to do something about this. I mean, in fairness, they did eventually do something about it.
But I feel like there's two things that come up all the time here that are applicable here again. The first is that, we only basically catch the really dumb cases that are so big and so obvious that like just everyone sees it immediately and goes, okay, that's not good. The special issues with 500 papers in it or whatever, like that's an obvious thing where like you get into trouble. But, and for individual scientists, you have, Jan Hendrik Schoen, who published like 8 papers in Nature and Science in 1 year. And, or you have, basically the people who, fly too high to the sun while committing fraud. Those are the ones we find. But someone who just occasionally, adds a little bit of a, boosts their CV occasionally with a, little bit of fraud here and there, you're not going to find them. Yeah.
I suspect it's like things might start off small and then you have to, if you're doing, again, you're manipulating, improving, massaging your data. Once you've made some claim that's only possible or have some discovery that's only possible because of a bit of fraud, see, every time you try and replicate or build on that, it's now on sand sort of thing. So everything follows from that is going to have to be also manipulated, because if you were honest, you'd discover that the first paper was wrong, right?
I wonder whether anyone's done that. Like intentionally, that would be ingenious. Create like intentionally this like big claim, and then 2 years later, publish it in like a huge journal, and then 2 years later go like, we did an unsuccessful replication, and then everyone's, oh, good on you, you published it unsuccessful.
You have so much integrity, so honest.
That's a good move. I bet someone's,
bold.
One of my heuristics is if you can think of it, someone has done it. No matter what it is, if you can think of someone doing it, someone has done it. So probably someone has. The other kind of recurring theme is that, not for fraud per se, or like misconduct or whatever, but it's just interesting because I work roughly in like social decision making, and gossip and reputation, all these kind of things are very powerful tools for maintaining a system. And I guess this is also kind of where we are here, right? Where a journal just acquires a reputation. It's probably forgotten very quickly. Once you read a paper that's like 30 years old, you have no idea what the journal is. But apart from a few cases, like now you're going to think more, are you going to submit something to Hindawi if you think you're doing good science?
Yeah.
If you know about this.
Exactly. I think, this is, again, like I said a bit about the maths journals, for example, where in some countries or in some areas, they know which journals are actually the good ones, not accounting for impact factor, knowing that's the thing that's just gamed and manipulated, not representative. And then other people who just don't have that information look at and have no reason to disbelieve the impact factor or anything. They go, oh, this is how it's ranked. Oh, here's a ranking. That's, that must be a good journal. I will submit my work there.
Yeah, so a really interesting thing there I find is that Google Scholar, they have their rankings, right? And they always do them by H-index of the journal. So like whoever publishes the most just is the highest. So like +1, I think, is often very high there and that kind of stuff. It's kind of interesting, like but I don't know why they choose that one.
I don't know how the H-index of a journal.
Yeah, I think it's just the same thing. Like over the course of a year or 2 years or whatever, how many papers got how many citations, But I guess so it seems to me then that, what you're doing in general and also right now, what we're doing is part of the solution in the sense to just say, these are things to look out for as an individual scientist and ways in which journals can improve. And then, that's the main way forward. Reputations are built and lost. And
it's be aware that all of the every single part of the publishing process it's in some people's interest to manipulate that. Whether that's,
you could phrase that in a much more fraud-friendly way. Each part of the publication process can be exploited if you really want to.
Yes. And there's people who want to do that, and you can make their life easier or harder, sort of thing. And I guess it's trying to make it harder for the fraudsters without making it awful for the honest people, and that's a big challenge. But even just being aware of it, right? Of not assuming that, be aware that some peer reviews might be done by people who are friends of the authors or being paid. That
happens a lot. Who people are friends of the authors, yeah. That's not even like a fringe thing, yeah.
That if someone, if a peer review comes back and it says, we recommend the authors add these 5 references to their paper to make sure it is up to date, and they're all by the peer reviewer, tell them not to, sort of.
Yeah. I think, and I've seen people, so I'm generally, probably like you, conflict averse. And also don't like when other people like publicly necessarily point things out. I think, it's not like an opinion. It's more like a gut feeling I have. But like, I do like it when people say, oh, look, I got this comment in peer review. And then you see this person just like suggesting 5 papers by the same first author. And you're like, yeah, you can be publicly shamed for that. That's just...
But I guess also be aware that this happens at every scale, right? It's not just authors trying to, so there are institutions who it seems fairly clear that there is an institutional push to their academics to try and raise the citation, raise both the numbers of publications, but also citations to that institution. Because university rankings some of them are judged on how many citations research coming from that institution gets, right? So there's now an institutional incentive to boost that, because then you get, if you get into the top 1,000 world universities, top 500 world universities, you will get more international students. They'll bring more money. You will get maybe more government funding, etc. So,
I remember when I did my master's at UCL, and they had in neuroscience, roughly, they had an introductory lecture to all the people who were, starting a master's in that area at UCL. And I think, one of the introductory guy, probably the dean or something like that, I don't know exactly, but, the statement he made literally was like, well, in the last 10 years, UCL was the second most cited institute for neuroscience in the world. And, we're going to get Harvard too. That was the official statement, right? And I get why they say it, right? It makes sense,
yeah.
But
again, because if that's how you're judging people, then you see that's another thing, little kind of fraud that we haven't even mentioned yet is affiliation sort of fraud. Institutions paying researchers to say, or to be affiliated with them, and the academic never sets foot in the institution. They just say, oh yeah, I'm also, I have a visiting something over here. It became a really big thing in Spain, I think last year, because a Spanish academic called Rafael Luca had said that his primary affiliation, not just an affiliation, but his primary affiliation was with a Saudi Arabian university, and his secondary affiliation was at the Spanish university where he actually worked. And what this meant was that all of deciding rankings for universities, they give all of the citations to HIT that he was getting, and this wasn't the only thing maybe he was gaming. He was getting a lot of citations and producing a lot of papers, and they were all being awarded to this Saudi Arabian university, so it was higher in the rankings.
Yeah, and related to that, just one of the meaner types of fraud I feel like is that I've seen is when people include just a random famous person as a middle author. I don't like that one in particular, I guess, because it's mean to the famous person. It's like,
you mean without the famous person's knowledge?
Yeah, just put them in as one of the middle authors or something, and then if people are like, oh, that person is involved in the paper, good. And then I've seen a few people on Twitter go, what is this? I don't know about this. People literally finding out afterwards that they supposedly had this paper.
And they haven't really, is that people making up fake authors. Which is, so there are...
Like for what purpose?
Well, this is, so some institutions, particularly outside of the West, reward academics if they collaborate with international collaboration, and particularly a Western collaboration, right? You're not just doing, you're you're collaborating internationally. You get to be on with a French academic, an American academic, whatever. Well, so one way to do that is to invent a Western academic, which means particularly because in the same way that if I was asked to invent the name of a Chinese or Japanese person, I would probably get it embarrassingly wrong, right? I'd pick I'd get surnames and first names the wrong way around. I would put, a first name which was in, from one even like decade matched with a surname that was from a different part of the country. And they're like, well, possible, but quite unlikely that these two these two different parts of China would have a name like this sort of thing. So there was a guy called Dragan Rodriguez, which is sort of a mix of like
Romanian and Spanish or something like that.
Yeah, so it's like Rodriguez, okay, yeah, some sort of Spanish, and then sort of some, Central Eastern European, Balkan sort of name.
I mean, those names exist.
Both of those names exist, and plausibly they could exist together.
Yeah. That's what I mean. I mean, as someone who has parents from two different countries, that stuff definitely exists. Yeah.
Yeah. But this person didn't.
Yeah.
They only existed on the titles of but more than one, like several papers by this, again, with a common author. And it means that, they had done international collaboration, so they probably got some sort of reward for doing that. One of the dangers, obviously, is that once someone starts to have a publication portfolio, well, now they can get a Google Scholar profile. Someone can, they can get an email address. And there are lots of institutions which don't have institutional email addresses. They're still using Gmail, they're using Yahoo, right? Not every university around the world has the infrastructure for academic email addresses.
Well, I mean, I actually, for my PhD, I didn't even use my PhD email address because I knew I was going to leave at some point, so I just made a Gmail address for my science stuff.
Right, exactly. So you can, you have a Gmail address or something, and now, well, for example, this person could have applied to, Dragan could have applied to Hindawi to run a special issue, and now it's not even, you now have got a fake guest editor, and if someone goes and looks, they'd find a Google Scholar profile with these publications. Dragan could also be a name you give. You could also use this profile to be a peer reviewer for, again, whoever you wanted to. So you can start to create these things.
I feel like somewhere there's a story of someone like you finding this out and then pretending to be Dragan and like taking advantages of all that stuff.
So, and my very favorite one of these is, again, it was in the Hindawi special issues, like one of these papers, where the author was someone called Clermont-Ferrand, which is a city of 100,000 people in France. But they had tried to find, a name and had somehow mixed things up. And instead of finding a French person, they had used the name of a French city, which sort of sounds like it could be a name because it's a sort of a two-word.
Yeah, and Clermont is, there are names that sound very similar to that in French.
And this is the extra mess of it. That made-up person was the corresponding author, and they had an email address from a school in Burundi, which was called something like King's School or King's College School, like Burundi. So it sounds a bit like university, and it was the same website where you could buy the Chinese university that I mentioned right at the start in bulk. You could also buy email addresses from this Burundian school. And so someone had decided they'd rather have that. But having fake author named after a French city with a Burundian school email address. Sort of a perfect little nugget of nonsense.
Yeah. It's kind of fun, the kind of stuff people make up if you forget about what it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so stupid.
Yeah. I mean, so what are you doing right now? Because you finished your PhD, right? You're still doing this, still spending lots of time at Facebook and saying, no, it's for research. How are you doing like new types of fraud that you've found and you're doing? Or so after my PhD, I was postdocing as well. And that's now pretty much finished. So I'm still doing some teaching, but trying to see if I can make this work as a living
try and find a way to turn this hobby that's got wildly out of hand into something which someone might pay me to do, to try and tackle some of this stuff.
So, I mean, what are the options there? I mean, I think I might have, maybe I talked to Elizabeth, I can't remember. I think I talked to someone, and said like sometimes like universities might have someone who's, in charge of like research ethics or something like that. There's a famous case, I guess, someone who does something in a different vein is the CoffeeZilla guy on YouTube, who investigates like fraud in like crypto and all this kind of stuff, and then posts like long videos that are super entertaining. I guess that's a whole different way of doing it. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious, like how does one do that? Do you know? Or
I mean, I don't yet. I think this is, despite the scale of the problem, there's very little resource being thrown at this. So publishers, every publisher has a research integrity team of some size or scale. All, I would say, are too small, but equally something that's important to me is being able to look at anything. And having spoken to people on those teams at publishers, once you work for commercial reasons, you can't just start looking at here, there, and everywhere. There's already enough stuff to deal with at your own publisher, even if commercially you had that freedom anyway. Yeah. And so I would have to stop, tweeting about weird things I found, writing blog posts about and things like that. And also would be restricted to the publisher I was working for. So
yeah, I mean, this might have been actually James Heathers who said it on one of the recent episodes on their podcast. I think it might have been him who said something like someone in that kind of role at a journal said in response to a public comment, we don't look at comments made anonymously on the internet or something like that, which is a complete proactive way of dealing with the situation. It's just going like, we have our formal way that we have people to go through. And I mean, it seems like that's exactly not what you're doing, right? You're doing like these innovative kind of ways of finding, as in checking people's WhatsApp groups, innovative ways of like finding this fraud, which is much more interesting.
Yeah, and trying to, not just looking at the paper, but looking, find the paper mill. Who's running the paper mill? How does it work? Who's involved with it? This sort of things, yeah. But yeah, so publishers one thing. Then, as you said, universities, I mean, not every university, but quite a few universities have, a person or maybe a few people who are, again, the research integrity people for that institution. But they are mostly, small teams, and universities don't like spending money. And,
also, do you want to be the university that has a guy poking in all sorts of holes?
Well, I mean,
potentially antagonizing journals or publishers, yeah.
Indeed, right. So then once you've taken that away, there's sort of very little left. There's a few, like science infrastructure companies, right? So, for example, you've got Dimensions, or the
is that the name of the company, or
the Digital Science? Sorry, you've got Digital Science, who make Dimensions, this like academic search engine. They make Altmetric. If you see, they make loads of. They own Overleaf, most pertinently to me. They do lots of things. You have Claravat, who running the Web of Science and doing these sorts of things. And again, they have people who are deciding what goes in the Web of Science list and things. They are looking at journals and making decisions about whether they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But still, even then, there's not many of these guys sort of nearly running out already. So there's a couple of companies like that, which are, again, private companies doing things. I mean, I think one of the interesting things is that I'm not saying I don't know exactly how I would want in my fantasy world as president want this to be, but like there isn't a science police, right? And again, I don't know if exactly I want the science police, but there is no, certainly in the UK at least, there is no overarching body that is investigating allegations of misconduct. So universities might choose to investigate allegations of misconduct against one of their researchers, and then they could, if they have, right, if pushed, if they have to, and then they could still decide that, it was probably done by some PhD student who left a while ago, and they say they've lost all the data, so we'll believe them. And so don't do that again, and, And
I
there's
guess the
nothing.
whole idea of to use the word police just for lack of a better term, the whole idea is that it's supposed to be independent and not part of a journal or a university, right? Like
Exactly.
It's supposed to be a separate
regulate. Yeah, I mean, maybe regulator is the better, investigative regulator. I think in the US there is something more like that. There's the ORI, the Office of Research Integrity, who are investigating what happens, with all the millions of dollars that NIH or whoever gives that in grant funding. I think last week, they released this report saying that someone had committed research fraud or misconduct over years and a dozen NIH grants, and they have the power to do that investigation, to go to in this sort of real oversight way. They're not siloed to one publisher, to one institution. They are looking at the whole thing. I think
what I understand there from literally the last episode I did with Eugenie Reich, I think she said, so I asked her why not more fraudsters are in prison for committing fraud and wasting everyone's time and all that kind of stuff. And I think she basically said usually the only cases in which people do go to jail is if they commit fraud and then based on that get grant funding or something like that.
So you're misusing government money.
Profit financially from it in a direct way. So that's probably why that was set up there, because it's government money that's being
But I don't even think we have even that in the UK. I don't know about the EU.
Yeah, it's the question what a welcome trust or anything or
UKRI
what they would do.
I don't know who would be responsible for investigating this thing. If there's allegations that someone's wasted a load of UKRI funding, for example, I don't know who that would be.
It's so crazy. I mean, in a way, I'm not that surprised that this is a kind of niche job title or job description that you're going for. I'm not surprised by that, right? But I'm kind of surprised that given the scale of this, of how much money is just being wasted that there isn't not every major, every country with a big scientific infrastructure, like most Western countries, that they don't just have 3 people doing this. It doesn't cost that much.
It feels like the return on investment should be really quite high to have a few people.
Even if there's 5 people and they have a really good salary, I mean, compared to the billions you spend in funding,
exactly, and money going to paying to publish this this fraudulent. You don't catch it earlier. It then goes. You pay for the privilege of publishing it in whichever journal. And
let's put it this way: the 12,000 pounds or whatever it is for Nature Communications or Human Behavior or Nature for open access charges. I guess you just need to catch 20 of those per year, and then you can have a very nice salary and it's paid for.
Absolutely, yeah. But it does feel that given this, the size of the whole enterprise, the fact that there's no one, as far as I'm aware.
And I guess, John, one of the thoughts I had, maybe because some of the stuff sounds vaguely investigative, like investigative journalism, but I guess that they're probably not interested in the same story over and over again, right?
There is a bit, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting once or twice, but then at some point, Nick, we don't need the 5th story of another guy doing the same thing.
Exactly, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, they have been interested, there have been some stories, but, they don't want to hear the same thing twice, right?
Yeah, I guess it's an open question, I don't know. Even for a brief moment, I thought about something like the Center for Open Science, because they do this big infrastructure in terms of creating the infrastructure that everyone can share their data for free. But it's different, I guess. It's not really, it's more making sure that the people who want to do the right thing can do the right thing, rather than finding people who cause all sorts of problems. People who find problems. That's what I mean. Not that you're causing problems per se.
In terms of who could pay me to do this stuff, this is somewhat an open question. Well, it's one I do not currently have the answer to.
Well, good luck.
Still exploring.
Yeah. But I guess I'm assuming you've been in contact with some of the main people who also do this kind of stuff, and like Elizabeth or James, they probably would know more than most other people.
Yes, I mean, so Elizabeth.
I think she also on a podcast said there's some stuff when she might be hired by some sort of consulting team to do something like that. So there are things like that, but it's not super predictable.
Yeah, it's not predictable
and regular. necessarily.
I don't know exactly. I don't know about James.
Yeah. So. At the end of each interview, I ask my guests the same 3 questions. The first is, what's a book or paper you think more people should read? And this can be old, it can be new, it can be famous, it can be completely obscure. Just something that you think more people should read.
So I think something I'd recommend, or something I was talking about, like the hacker mindset, in terms of, I guess, if you're trying to approach a system, thinking about how someone would try and break that system, what all the different like entry points that someone could try and attack. And so something I quite enjoy watching every so often is talks from hacker conferences, like Black Hat and DEF CON. And some of them are incredibly technical. They're going into, how we dismantle this or work out this chipset's instructions or something, right? And it's way over my head. But there are others which I think are, one, often very entertaining talks in their own right and very interesting. But so there's people whose job is called penetration testing. Right? So they are paid by companies, but also even by governments or institutions to say, sometimes physically, try and break into this facility. We give you within, these are your rules of operation. Can, and this is, the week you're going to do it. Try and, can you get through the reception desk? Can you access the servers? What can you get to? And I find those really interesting. Often these people are you have to have a lot of confidence. You have to have other things. But what you can do when you just, walk through with confidence, wearing a high-vis vest or having a lanyard or a t-shirt that says IT on it, right? You can go almost anywhere. And some of these, and I think, and they're looking at all the different possible ways that you can break into a facility or different tactics. And the same with, social engineering things where someone's, job is to try and ring up a company like cold and try and get through to the person who will give you some information that they're really not supposed to give you. I find those really interesting. And I think that taking that sort of approach or thinking about it from that perspective for the publishing system, I think could be quite helpful actually in trying to, because it's what the bad guys are doing in terms of it's what if they are seeing where can we get in, what can we manipulate, who's trusting something which they're just taking on trust if we can just lie, where are the chinks sort of in the armor?
That's really interesting. Do you have a particular thing I can link to? Or I mean, you can also send it to me if you can't think of one right now, but it would be cool if I had like one that's like a good starting point. This sounds really interesting. Yeah.
So I think I've watched quite a few of these penetration testing ones. There's another talk, which is my favorite one, is from a guy called Barnaby Jack. And this is from maybe 15 years ago now or something. And that also sounds like a made-up name by someone trying to create a European co-author. Yeah. So he's sadly no longer with us, but New Zealand guy who bought a cash machine online, like an ATM, a freestanding ATM. Yeah. He bought one on eBay, and then worked out how he could remotely get it to fire money out. And he's an incredible presenter. It's really funny talking to say, right, you don't need to be some computer whiz to understand most of what he's doing. It's lots of it. Really funny things where he has it just in his house and he manages to, in trying to play with it, he manages to break it and it's just sort of bricked. He can't. And so he rings up the maintenance guy who was obviously used to going to these, in the back of a corner shop, in the back of a department store or something. And it's just this guy's house. And he's like, why do you have this in your house? And it's like, I'm holding it for a mate. It was like some ridiculous excuse. And the guy was like, but the guy happily fixed it. And then he went, so yeah.
I wonder, does that guy have to report it to the police? I guess not.
I think you're allowed to own them.
Yeah, I guess you are. Yeah.
If he did buy it legitimately, the thing, he didn't nick it.
Okay.
But that's a wonderful talk. And again, it's looking at this. How do I go through this system? What are the loopholes? How can I exploit this to get what I want?
Yeah. By the way, just because this happened to me once, I think a common way to do an ATM hack is to have a mobile phone stuck to the top of it where you can't see it. and then to have the readers over the actual reader.
Yeah.
So I had that once when my card didn't come out, and then I didn't have a mobile phone on me. Luckily, there was a phone booth when those still existed, like right outside. So I called the police from that, and they were like, "Yeah, if you don't have any evidence, like we can't come just because your card doesn't come out." And so I went back, and there was this like mobile phone, like to the top of the thing, just pointing down. Like it was obvious once you saw it, but you just never pay attention to it. Because
who sticks their head under the thing? Yeah.
And then I was like, I've got a mobile phone with a camera on. Is that enough evidence? And then they came. So pay attention to that, people. But okay, so I'll link the talk, I guess, that you mentioned, right? Yeah, okay. Second question, what's something you wish you learned sooner? That can be from any part of your life that you want to, that you're willing to share. Just something where you think, it would be good if I'd learned that a bit sooner, and also maybe, again, if you're willing to share how you learned it and or kind of what you did about it.
Yeah. No, I find this is the trickiest one of the questions you say. It's like,
I mean, you can take it in all sorts of ways. Some people have taken it very personally. Some people have taken it like very, just like specific nuanced thing about their work. I mean, whatever you want, basically.
That's what I would say. I wish I'd known earlier how much I enjoy teaching. I think I could have chosen to start teaching, do some teaching right from day one of my PhD. But in the end, I didn't really do any until I finished my PhD and was postdocing. But I often, when the university term is going, it's often the most enjoyable hours of my week. Certainly the most rewarding is teaching students. And so I wish that I had started doing that from the beginning.
Forced to do it? Or like how did you find out that you actually enjoyed doing it?
No, not force it, but I guess I have a position where part of
that's
the
kind
position,
of what I mean, right?
They're like, and as part of this, can you do this teaching a few hours a week? And
you said fine, but now you actually like it.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't know I hated it. Sort of, it wasn't like I thought I'd hate it. I just sort of felt, I could take it or leave it. But actually, I love it, and I wish I had sought it out earlier in my PhD.
Okay. Well, that's handy if if the path to doing, what we've been talking about as a full-time job is uncertain. I guess it's good to have something that you actually really enjoy doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
final question is, basically any advice for people on the kind of PhD postdoc border, or you can take it also a bit more metaphorical if you want to, but basically I started my postdoc recently. Any advice? That's kind of part of the question.
I would say, and I say this as someone who has not managed this, but start applying for jobs. Like start applying for assistant professor-y, lectureship-y. If that's what you want to do, or that's what you'd aim to do, start sort of now, or
I mean, rather than waiting 2-3 years and letting it come to you, but like being more proactive about it.
Be more proactive about it. The first time you have to do the application, it takes ages because you don't have a research statement, you don't have a teaching statement, you don't have an EDI statement, and whatever other hoops you are required of you to jump through. So just doing it the first time takes ages, and they'll probably not be great. But you've got to do it the first time to then get, you don't want the first one to be, I guess, the perfect job that you really, and having the experience, the more you do them, like the better it will get. You will have something, something to add to as you do keep going through the postdoc, and you can just start adding things to it and finessing it and things like that. And if you do make it through to interview, you'll start getting practice at interviews, which again, depending on how you got this postdoc and things like that, you may not have done many interviews. Again, depending if you've had jobs, some people may have barely ever done an interview, right? And some people might have to do quite a few. But regardless, you'll have just starting to get that practice. With that, I'd say there's not really a reason to waiting for I need to get my first postdoc under my belt, or I need to get 2 years of stuff under my belt. and then starting, you're just sort of delayed.
Yeah, I agree. I learned that the hard way for my, not that hard way, but a bit of the hard way for my postdoc fellowship applications, where the best one was basically the first one I could apply for. And yeah, you just think, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. And suddenly, God, I've just never thought about this aspect.
Yeah, right.
And then you just have to write something and it just takes way longer than you think. And then in my case, I ended up spending way less time on my actual research proposal because I spent so much time on all these other stuff that how do you want to disseminate your things? Like, it's kind of obvious in a way. It's not like you're going to have a revolutionary answer there, but it still takes way longer than you think it does to write it for the first time.
Exactly. And obviously it is taking up a bit of time, but again, it takes up the most time the first time, and then it will get quicker.
Yeah. Second one was a tenth the work.
Yeah. And I guess, worse, they just reject you. Oh, well, hopefully someone's now seen your name or something. And the best case is you get the job, right? And if that's the way you want to go, then suddenly you've got it, sort of thing. You've begun.
I guess in some sort of irony of the world, you're also probably more likely to get it if you don't actually care that much, versus if you're desperate because you need to get a job now.
Yeah, you don't. So I'd say that would be my recommendation.
So yeah, that was all from me. So thank you very much, and I guess good luck with finding some way to earn a living that way.
Thank you.